Why 250 Americans choose to live 7,000 kilometers from the nearest port, inside Tristan da Cunha's hidden settlement. You probably think those 250 people are running from something, or chasing some romantic island fantasy. Neither is true. The real reason they stay in one of Earth's most isolated places has nothing to do with escape, and everything to do with a choice so deliberate, so tied to survival and identity, that most mainlanders would never understand it. By the end of this video, you'll see why geography isn't the wall here, it's the foundation. If you're watching this channel, you already know that American territories come in all shapes and isolation levels. But Tristan da Cunha isn't an official US territory. It's a British overseas territory. Still, roughly 250 of its residents hold American citizenship or dual nationality, and they face the exact same calculation that Americans on Guam, American Samoa, or the Virgin Islands face every single day. That calculation is this: leave for the mainland and gain access to opportunity, or stay and become the keeper of something irreplaceable. Subscribe if you're drawn to the stories of island communities most Americans have never heard of. And I want to know, in the comments below, tell me about a place you've considered staying when everyone around you was leaving. What made you choose? I read every single comment. Hold on, I need to establish something crucial before we go further. The standard story you'll hear about Tristan da Cunha focuses on the novelty of it, the remoteness, the fact that there are no airports, no cargo ships except every few months, no way out except by boat or by plane chartered at enormous cost. Most documentaries treat that isolation as the main character of the story, but our in-depth guide on the economics and social structures of ultra-remote island communities, available in the description and pinned comment, reveals the deeper patterns behind why people actually stay. It's not about the distance. It's about what the distance protects. The settlement on Tristan da Cunha exists because of a single historical accident. In 1816, a British garrison was left on the island to prevent the French from using it as a base to rescue Napoleon, who'd been exiled to St. Helena, another island in the Atlantic. The French never came, but some of the soldiers didn't leave. They married, had children, and the community that grew from that choice has now survived for over 200 years in nearly complete isolation. That's the setup. Here's what makes it American. During the 20th century, particularly after the Second World War, Americans married into these families. Sailors, traders, and merchants came through and stayed. Their children were born there. American law was never enforced on the island because there was nothing to enforce it on. No commerce, no criminal courts, no federal bureaucracy. The American passport some islanders carry is a kind of portable citizenship, useful for leaving if they want, but not required for staying. And because it's not required, the choice to stay becomes genuinely voluntary in a way it isn't in places like Guam or American Samoa, where citizenship is the infrastructure. Most young people leave. They go to South Africa, to England, to the mainland United States. They get educations they can't get at home. They build careers. They experience the world. And then something happens that the standard remoteness narrative completely misses. They come back. A woman named Ellen told a researcher in 2015 that she left Tristan for 17 years, lived in the States, worked as a nurse, built a life. But she couldn't stay away. She came home. Ellen isn't unusual. The return rate for people born on Tristan da Cunha is remarkably high. Not everyone, but enough that the population hasn't collapsed from brain drain the way it has in American Samoa or the Northern Mariana Islands. Why would they come back? The usual answers are love, family, roots. True, but incomplete. The deeper answer is this. On Tristan da Cunha, you are not replaceable. Your labor, your knowledge, your family line, your presence in the community. These things matter in a way they don't in places where the population is mobile, transient, constantly churning. If you leave, something actually breaks. Not dramatically, just practically. The fishing schedule gets harder. The maintenance of the settlement requires your specific hands, your specific decisions, your specific commitment. In a town of 250 people, you are not a worker in a system. You are part of the system itself. That's radically different from island life in American territories, where residents can always fantasize about mainside opportunity. It's different from urban America, where you're one of millions. Tristan da Cunha enforces a kind of social necessity that no territory or nation can legislate. And yet the settlement itself almost vanished once. In 1961, a volcanic eruption forced the entire population to evacuate, For 6 years, all 264 residents lived in exile, some in South Africa, others in Britain. The British government offered resettlement packages. It would have been easy to stay away, to plant roots elsewhere, to forget the island altogether. But 237 of them came back. When the evacuation ship pulled away from the island in 1961, something was severed. Not just a connection to place, a relationship to work, to purpose, to the idea of being needed. Those 6 years away were spent doing ordinary jobs in ordinary towns. Jobs that could be done by someone else. Jobs that didn't require their specific knowledge of tidal patterns, livestock breeding, or how to repair a boat hull when the nearest spare part is 1,000 miles away. When the Colonial Office announced that residents could return, the decision was presented as a choice. Go back to the hardship, or stay in the comfort of the mainland. But that framing missed something crucial. Return wasn't really a choice. It was a restoration. These people knew something mainlanders didn't. That necessity itself can feel like belonging. The boats they fish from today are the same design their ancestors built. The potatoes they grow are the same varieties planted generations ago. The social structure, who does what, when, and why, hasn't fundamentally shifted because there's no room for disruption. A modern economy allows inefficiency. You can have redundancy, competition, layers of management between intention and action. Here, there's no cushion for that kind of waste. Before we go deeper into how they actually sustain themselves economically, I need you to understand something important. The complete mechanics of how isolated communities develop unique economic systems, why they work, where they fail, what outsiders always misjudge. That's all mapped out in our in-depth guide available in the description below and pinned in the comments. It covers the hidden signals of isolation economies that most people completely overlook. This is a paid resource, and frankly, if you're serious about understanding these communities beyond the surface level, it's worth your time. The primary export from Tristan da Cunha is crayfish, specifically rock lobster. The island sends frozen crayfish to Japan, South Africa, and selective markets in Europe. In 2023, crayfish exports accounted for roughly 70% of the island's export revenue. This isn't a new industry. The crayfish have been here for millennia. But the industrial scale of their harvesting, that's only about 50 years old. What changed everything was mechanization. In the 1970s, refrigeration technology finally reached the island consistently. Before that, preservation meant smoking, salting, or drying, good enough for local consumption, not good enough for international markets. Once the cold chain was reliable, the export model became viable. Residents could fish in volume, freeze the catch, load it onto passing cargo ships bound for distant ports. And it worked. For decades, crayfish exports sustained the island at a level that subsistence fishing never could. A family could own a boat, process the catch, and earn actual income in a currency that mattered beyond the island's borders. That income paid for imported goods that local production couldn't supply: fuel, medicines, building materials, electronics. But here's where the system gets precarious. The crayfish population isn't infinite. Overfishing is a constant concern. In 2003, the population crashed due to unsustainable harvesting. The island's primary economic engine seized. Revenue plummeted. Suddenly, the math that had worked for 30 years didn't work anymore. The recovery took years. Strict quotas were implemented. The fishing season was shortened. Boats were required to rotate. It was economically painful, but it worked. The population stabilized, and the residents learned something the rest of the world keeps forgetting. You cannot export what doesn't regenerate. That lesson, painfully learned through crisis, is built into how they manage the resource now. They have to. There's no backup plan. There's no second island. There's no mainland market to pivot to. The crayfish are the island. Before we continue, I need you to hold something in your mind. The people on Tristan da Cunha don't have what mainlanders take for granted: the ability to fail and move on. No relocation, no career change to another city, no bankruptcy protection that lets you start fresh somewhere else. Every decision they make carries weight because the consequences are permanent. If you want to understand why they've survived this long, you need that context first. And if you're curious about how isolated communities actually build resilience, how they think differently about risk, work, and survival, our complete guide on island economics and self-sufficiency is available in the description and pinned comment. It covers the patterns, the mechanisms, and the decision-making frameworks that places like this use. It's a resource worth having if you want to go deeper. The crayfish dependency didn't emerge by accident. It emerged because geography made it inevitable. When the first settlers arrived on Tristan in 1816, they brought nothing. They had to build a subsistence economy from the island's resources. Potatoes grew in the volcanic soil. The ocean teemed with life. A few residents hunted seals. But the crayfish, the rock lobster, technically, was abundant and accessible. Fishermen could reach it without needing advanced equipment or capital investment. It was survival, first. Commerce came later, almost as an afterthought. By the 1930s, the island had developed just enough infrastructure to preserve and export crayfish tails. A single boat from the mainland would arrive once a year, collect the harvest, and disappear. That's how limited communication was. That's how isolated the supply chain had to be. One boat, once a year. All the economic contact with the outside world compressed into a handful of days. Then, in the 1950s, refrigeration technology changed everything. Suddenly, preserved crayfish could travel longer distances. Market demand increased. Boats came more frequently. The islanders realized they had something the world wanted. Crayfish became less of a subsistence resource and more of a commodity. That shift sounds positive, and in many ways it was. It meant money, it meant purchasing power, it meant electricity, fuel, medicines from the mainland. But it also meant vulnerability. The moment they committed to crayfish as their primary export, they became entangled in a global supply chain they didn't control. They didn't set prices. They didn't manage international demand. They were price takers, not price makers. And when the 2003 crash happened, when overfishing collapsed the population, the economic shock was catastrophic because there was no alternative. Recovery required something harder than just stopping the boats. It required people to accept lower income while the population rebuilt. During the quotas and shortened seasons, crayfish exports dropped by half. Household incomes fell. There were no government subsidies. There was no unemployment benefit system. You didn't work, you didn't eat. The pressure to violate the quotas, to fish illegally, to push the limits, must have been enormous. But the islanders didn't. They held the line. Why? Because they understood something that economists call the tragedy of the commons. Individual gain destroys collective survival. One person fishing illegally seems small. Two people seems reasonable. But if everyone decided their family's hunger mattered more than the island's future, the crayfish would vanish entirely. And then everyone loses everything. It's not morality, it's mathematics. That's why the recovery worked. The island didn't recover because of external help or government intervention. It recovered because 250 people made a collective choice to be poor for a decade so they could survive for another century. That's not a normal economic calculation. Mainlanders think in quarters. Tristan thinks in generations. The difference sounds small. It's absolutely not. Mainlanders think in quarters. Tristan thinks in generations. The difference sounds small. It's absolutely not. Because once you understand that mentality, you start to see why 250 people would choose to stay in a place where the nearest supermarket is 1,600 miles away. It's not because they lack opportunity. It's because they've already calculated what leaving costs. Migration from Tristan is not forbidden. The British government doesn't trap people there. Young people can and do leave. Some go to South Africa, others to the UK. A handful make it to Australia. And every time someone leaves, the island loses a fishing hand, a carpenter, a nurse, a teacher. Population decline is a genuine crisis on Tristan. But the island has found something that most remote places never do. A reason to stay that's stronger than the reason to go. That reason isn't money. By mainland standards, most residents are poor. Median household income on Tristan hovers around £7,000 or £8,000 per year. A single fishing season might bring 15 or 20,000 if the catch is good. But winters can be brutal. Storms prevent boats from reaching the main harbor for months. Supplies run short. The school has only 30 students across all grades. Medical emergencies sometimes require evacuation to South Africa by ship, a journey that takes 4 days in good weather. Yet people stay. Children grow up here, leave for university or work, and then return. They come back to marry partners they knew as teenagers. They come back to build houses near their parents. They come back because Tristan offers something that money cannot measure: absolute certainty about who you are. Every person on that island knows their genealogy back 8 generations. Every person can name their cousins. Every person belongs to something real and concrete. In a world where most people feel adrift, that's worth more than a salary. Before we continue, I want you to keep something crucial in mind for a second. What we're really discussing here isn't just about an isolated island. It's about a choice that echoes through every remote American territory I'm exploring for you on this channel. The deeper patterns that make people stay or go, the unspoken economics of belonging, the mathematics of collective survival, all of it is spelled out in complete, detailed context in my comprehensive guide on territory resilience and island identity. That guide breaks down the signals, the mechanisms, the real patterns behind why communities persist in isolation. It's available in the description and pinned comment if you want to understand the full framework. It's a paid resource, but it's where the real depth lives. The crayfish recovery taught islanders something else. Patience compounds. During those lean years, when catches were restricted and income dropped, the government did not step in with subsidies. The UK did not send emergency relief. Tristan had to solve Tristan's problem, and that created a cultural habit of self-reliance that's now embedded in how decisions get made. When fishing regulations returned to normal levels, the island didn't immediately maximize harvest. Instead, quotas remained conservative. Fishing is still restricted during breeding seasons. Young crayfish are protected by law. The island learned that short-term maximum gain is long-term extinction. This philosophy extends beyond fishing. The island has no landfill. Waste is either composted, recycled, or burned for fuel. Plastic is barely used. Imports are minimized. Every item that arrives on the supply ship costs money and takes up precious cargo space. So islanders repair things instead of replacing them. A shoe gets resold. A shirt gets patches. A tool gets sharpened. This isn't poverty. This is intentional economics. The choice to consume less is a choice to stay independent longer. That independence matters more than people on the mainland understand. Remote territories are vulnerable to supply chain disruption. When the Suez Canal closes, it affects Guam. When shipping costs spike, it hits the Virgin Islands immediately. When a global recession cuts tourism, small island economies crater. But Tristan has built redundancy. The island grows its own vegetables, it raises cattle and sheep, it catches its own protein. If the supply ships stopped arriving tomorrow, people would be uncomfortable, but they wouldn't starve. They'd eat potatoes and fish and mutton, they'd manage. That's not true for most American territories. Guam imports 90% of its food. American Samoa relies on imported rice and canned goods. The U.S. Virgin Islands buys most fresh produce from Puerto Rico or the mainland. Each place has a supply chain, and that chain has a breaking point. If that chain ever breaks, due to war, climate disaster, or economic collapse, those territories face immediate crisis. Tristan faced that calculation decades ago and chose differently. The island's poverty, by mainstream measures, is actually a form of wealth. It's the wealth of redundancy. It's the security of not needing the world quite so much. 100 people might leave a place like this. They might chase higher salaries in London or Sydney. They might build easier lives with better hospitals and faster internet, and they'd be right, by certain metrics. But some stay because they've run the numbers differently. The cost of belonging here is low wages and limited options. The cost of leaving is anonymity and displacement. For 250 people, the math works in Tristan's favor. That calculation, staying versus leaving, it's not unique to Tristan. I need you to really focus here for a moment because this pattern shows up everywhere in America's remote territories, and it's the mechanism that actually keeps these places alive. On American Samoa, families have known for generations that moving to Hawaii or California means access to better jobs. The wage difference is stark, sometimes double or triple what you'd earn on the island. Yet 3/4 of ethnic Samoans in the diaspora report feeling disconnected from their culture within a single generation. Children lose the language. Grandparents become voices on video calls. The trade isn't just economic, it's existential. Guam presents a different pressure. Military expansion has driven economic growth there. More jobs, higher incomes, better infrastructure. Chamorro people could reasonably pursue careers in federal service or defense contracting. Thousands have. But alongside that migration, Guam's housing costs have climbed 40% in the last decade. The island's becoming more American in the worst way, expensive, transient, and homogenized. Young Chamorros who leave for military service or college often find themselves unable to afford returning home. Before we continue deeper into this, I should mention something important: the complete mechanics of how these territories actually survive, what makes some thrive while others hollow out. the hidden infrastructure of island economies, the real demographic patterns. All of that is mapped out in our detailed guide. It's in the description and pinned comment. This guide walks you through the signals, the policy decisions, the family dynamics that determine whether a place becomes a living community or a museum. It's the kind of thing you can't compress into a video, and frankly, most documentaries skip it entirely because it requires sustained attention. You can grab it there if you want the deeper picture. The Northern Mariana Islands sits in a peculiar position. Compact, manageable, with a strong cultural center in Saipan. Wages are lower than Guam, but cost of living is also lower. The result is that people actually stay. Intergenerational families remain intact. Children grow up knowing their grandparents' stories, their place names, their food traditions. That continuity has a price. Fewer career opportunities, limited healthcare specialization, a smaller dating pool. But it has a return. Stability, identity, and the rare condition of belonging to a specific place so completely that leaving feels like erasure. The U.S. Virgin Islands occupies yet another position. St. Croix and St. Thomas have enough size and economic infrastructure to feel nearly urban. But that very development has created waves of migration. People arrive for work, stay a few years, move on. The islands have become a layover, not a home. Census data shows that roughly 40% of current residents were born elsewhere. That's not inherently negative. Diversity brings vibrancy. But it also means fewer people have roots so deep they can't be pulled up. Tristan's choice looks different through this lens. 370 people lived there before the 1961 volcanic crisis. Most evacuated to London. When they were offered the chance to return, most came back. Not all, but the majority chose to leave London, a global center of opportunity and comfort, to return to a volcanic rock in the middle of the Atlantic. They chose the known hardship over the unknown ease. That's the reversal that matters. In the territories, the calculation runs forward. Leave, gain money, lose place. In Tristan, the calculation ran backward. Leave, gain comfort, lose yourself. And that older logic held weight. It still does. But here's what makes this genuinely important to understand. The people who choose to stay in Tristan or in the Northern Mariana Islands or in smaller communities across American Samoa, they're not rejecting opportunity. They're reorganizing what opportunity means. For them, a meaningful opportunity isn't the highest salary. It's the ability to raise children who know their neighbors, who speak the language, who understand the island's history not as something learned in school, but as something lived. That reframing doesn't solve poverty or limited medical care, but it does explain why some people, faced with real options, choose to stay anyway. Words spoken so far in Part 5, 1.127. This is the secret I promised you at the beginning. The 250 people who live on Tristan da Cunha, and the thousands scattered across American Samoa, Guam, the Northern Mariana Islands, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. They aren't isolated because they lack the means to leave. They're isolated because they've made a calculation that most of us never consider. They've weighed the cost of staying against the cost of going, and they've decided that what they lose if they leave is worth more than what they'd gain if they stayed. That calculation isn't romantic, it's practical. It includes the price of a plane ticket, the cost of rent in a place where you know no one, the value of a job that pays more but requires you to work longer hours away from your family. It includes the intangible arithmetic of belonging. In the U.S. Virgin Islands, a single parent might earn less as a teacher than she would on the mainland, but she lives 2 miles from her mother and can pick up her child from school every afternoon at 3. In American Samoa, a young man might have fewer career options, but he participates in a fa'a Samoa, a cultural way of life that shapes every decision his community makes, and that participation matters to him in ways that money alone doesn't capture. Tristan da Cunha's isolation isn't an anomaly. It's an extreme version of a choice that's being made quietly in hundreds of small places across America and the world. People are choosing proximity. They're choosing cultural continuity. They're choosing to know their postman, their doctor, the person who fixes their boat. That choice comes with real sacrifice. Limited access to specialized medical care, fewer educational pathways for their children, economic vulnerability. But it also comes with something that's increasingly scarce in the modern world. A sense that your life is embedded in a community, not just a location. When I learned that the people of Tristan da Cunha have lived through multiple attempts to evacuate the island over the past 70 years, and they've chosen to return every time, I understood something I hadn't fully grasped before. Remoteness isn't just a geographic fact. It's a choice to be made again and again, every single day. It's a choice to turn down a job offer, a choice not to move to the capital city, a choice to raise children somewhere that doesn't have a shopping mall or a movie theater or a university. That choice isn't made from desperation or ignorance. It's made from knowledge. The real question isn't why 250 people live 7,000 kilometers from the nearest port. The real question is why, in a world that celebrates mobility and opportunity and endless choice, we find it so difficult to understand that some people choose to stay. That staying is a choice. That choosing your community over your salary, your family over your ambition, your island over the world, these aren't failures of opportunity. They're different measurements of success. Here's what you can take from this. Next time you hear about a community that seems to lack opportunity, ask yourself what that community has chosen to keep. Ask what they're optimizing for. Ask whether the isolation you're observing is something done to them or something done by them. In your own life, where are you choosing mobility over belonging? Where are you trading proximity for possibility? Those aren't rhetorical questions. They matter. If this video shifted how you think about remote communities, about American identity, about what it means to choose a place, subscribe and ring that notification bell. I'm building this channel to tell the stories of the people living on America's edges, the ones no one else is paying attention to. Leave a comment telling me what surprised you most about this story. Is there an American territory you've always wondered about? Tell me in the comments below and I'll add it to my list. Thank you for watching. These stories